we all introduce ourselves again, since we don't see each other once a month. So I'm Gary Albrecht, project manager for this sounding board as we develop the transportation system plan. And Matt, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Matt Herman. I'm a long-range transportation planner with Clark County Public Works.
Mike, you want to go?
Sure. I'm Mike Salas, and I work with Gary and Matt in Public Works and also in community planning.
Hi, I'm Dan Somerville. I'm a long-range community planner with community planning. Or I guess I should say land use planner with community planning.
I'm Daniel Weaver, chair of the Railroad Advisory Board and the Board of Equalization.
Jay Chester, I'm a member of the Clark County Parks Advisory Board.
Michael Andriotti, the chair for Clark Community's Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
Linda David with Southwest Washington Regional Transportation Council.
Tommy Stewart, representing Commission on Aging.
It's Jamie Housley, a land use attorney with Jordan Remus and representative of the Development and Engineering Advisory Board.
So Gary, it looks like that's the sounding board members. We also have our interpreters on the conference, but we are the sounding board members that are absent include Dave Poland, Amy Rourke, and Walt Gordon. So hopefully they'll be able to join us here soon. Looks like Amy is on the line now.
Hope they'll be able to join us too. All right, I'm going to switch to the presentation. So transportation system plan and sounding board. This is our third meeting, and I have to share some sad news for Clark County. Dan Somerville is taking another job back east and will no longer be with us. So his talents will be missed here at Clark County. I just want to say thank you, Dan, for all of your help.
Appreciate that, Gary. I'll miss you all.
Luckily, you'll be able to virtually join us if you'd like. Which probably won't happen, but I understand.
Yeah.
All right, so there's the agenda that we got. Same one as what you just saw. So I have this image on here, and if anyone wants to give me another image that we can replace, that would be great. I'm happy to add another image to this slide. And here's our topic schedule. We'll see this every meeting. We are at 8:17. Going back to do vehicular transportation. And a new topic is freight rail aviation. And our questions from last month, we had 3 of them. We got to one of them, the first one. Are we managing congestion effectively for all transportation system users? And we'll come back and revisit that in a minute. And then the other 2 remaining questions that we didn't get through is, do our level of service standards accomplish our goals and policies? And then should Clark County pursue a different level of service standard? This slide provides a summary of what we heard last month. Last month, we sent additional information about level of service alternative examples that we can discuss now to help answer the remaining 2 questions. So what I heard last month was congestion is not managed effectively. Congestion challenges occur where county roads intersect with state roads. Road space does not seem adequate to accommodate people walking and bicycling. Traffic signals seem to provide varying levels of pedestrian service. C-Tran bus ridership and service routes can be improved. So these last two bullets, I added them without getting into some specific negative language. So it's hopefully it's good enough to pass what everyone felt that we talked about, but we can come back to that in a little bit. Okay, so I am going to switch to the level of service examples we went through last. Did everyone have a chance to go and read these individually? I hear crickets. That's a no.
Yes, yes, Gary. Sorry.
I did.
Okay, good. There's two. All right, well, I'll start out with the multimodal level of service. A good example that we have is Bellingham in Washington has a multimodal transportation concurrency program. It features multimodal level of service, LOS standards, and performance measures that include sidewalks, bike lanes, WTA transit, multi-use recreation trails, as well as vehicles, and is designed to help the city achieve their 2016 Comprehensive Plan Transportation Element Goals, directing infill growth primarily to urban villages and to help complete sidewalks and bike lanes throughout the city. So it's an innovative approach aimed toward achieving Bellingham's long-term mode shift goals to reduce the percentage of trips made by single occupant vehicles while increasing the percentage of trips made by pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit riders. In fact, the American Planning Association has a case study on it called Moving Beyond the Automobile, Multimodal Transportation Planning in Bellingham, Washington. It's a good article if you hadn't read it. So their multimodal approach integrate land use and transportation goals, policies and development regulations, and funding mechanisms to ensure adequate facilities are available for pedestrians, bicyclists, transit riders, and vehicle users. Their concurrency is consistent with land use and transportation goals and policies along a long list of multimodal transportation projects needed to accommodate projected population growth.
Gary?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. David just emailed, and I think he's in the other meeting.
Oh, good. Did you tell him to join this one?
Thank you, Michael. I'll email him back and let him know which is the correct one. Sorry for the confusion.
Thank you. Wonder how that happened. And take a quick pause for a second to see if he can join us.
Hey, this is Amy. Who increases the speed limit on the highways by any chance? Because if anybody's noticed, everybody goes 70. That's like the old 60 is now 70 everywhere.
Well, everybody is saying that they're not going to enforce minor infractions of the highway now because they don't have the resources to do that. So everybody is speeding accordingly.
Well, you know, so the state highways are patrolled by Washington State State Patrol, and then Clark County patrols the county roads, and the cities, patrol the cities areas. So if, it all depends on, everyone's got a non-emergency phone number to call, and we can get in. Later on in the slide, I have some information on who to call for non-emergency numbers for Clark County. So we'll get to that, and you're welcome to call them whenever you see anyone speeding that you feel shouldn't be speeding.
So they're going to have the community doing that? That's going to be a lot of office paperwork for somebody else. I don't know, weird.
Well, no, so I'm not saying the community is doing that. There's a limited number of officers, and they cannot see everything. So if you see something that an officer ought to know, then that's what you would call. And yeah, it's not my business, and that's all I know. So I mean, I hear what you're saying, but you know, that's as far as I can go. Is offer, you know, a phone number to call. Okay, so we're moving on. David with us now? David, there you are. Hi, David. Person capacity versus automobile capacity. So the City of Redmond, Washington uses this tool to manage the pace of development by providing transportation improvements for all users, including bicyclists, pedestrians, drivers, and transit riders. Their concurrency model, they claim, is simple. They compare a system demand to system supply by comparing transportation mobility units. And their approach estimates person demand by mode of travel to supply available supply of mobility units, and then uses this comparison to apply the concurrency review process when development occurs. Their system is definitely interesting. So their mobility units, they establish a common unit of comparison between transportation demand, defined as person miles of travel, and transportation supply, projects and programs that provide transportation capacity. As the city commits to funding projects and programs in the transportation facility plan, mobility units are generated. Mobility units of supply are generated. When developers apply for building permits, they create mobility units of demand. So the City of Redmond uses it as concurrency, and as long as the mobility units of supply equal or exceed the mobility units of demand. If the supply falls below demand, then permit applications must undertake mitigation or delay their projects. It looks simple from the picture. It's just that the mobility units gets a little complicated to kind of explain, but that's okay. And the person delay, this measure uses microsimulation to evaluate the delay per person for each mode of travel at an intersection. It allows for various transportation modes to be combined and compared equally. In addition, this microsimulation is conducive to evaluating alternatives in project development. Some benefits of using person delay are that all modes are accounted for, including vehicle and transit occupancy, and it provides insight into how different types of improvements can benefit different modes. And there is our current level of service standards. So for urban collector and arterial streets inside the Vancouver urban growth boundary, we use the volume to capacity ratio. Anything above 0.9 indicates a failure. And then intersections of regional significance outside of Vancouver urban growth boundary has a different measure, 2 cycle lengths or 240 seconds of delay, whichever is less. So that's it for our overview of the level of service examples. Get back to the presentation. Clark County's local, regional, and state economy is highly dependent upon the efficient transport of goods to and from markets. Without investments to maintain and improve freight mobility in key highway and rail corridors and to intermodal freight connections, the region's economy and its jobs sustainability is at risk. There are 2 main rail lines, both owned by Burlington Northern Santa Fe, that run through Clark County. Main lines carry both freight and passengers. BNSF operates more than 1,400 miles in Washington, which represents 44% of the rail system in the state. The Schlachey Prairie Railroad is a 33-mile short line railroad owned by Clark County and operated by Portland-Vancouver Junction Railroad Company, a private operator. The short line railroads provide important collector distributor services for the larger railroads and local rail services, and local rail services for shippers. And then moving on to ports. The port districts are special purpose local governments charged with operating port facilities that support local economic development. Ports operate marine and inland waterways, ports, airports, and industrial parks. Ports also operate some types of recreational facilities such as marinas. Port districts develop master plans or comprehensive schemes that identify the location and intensity of development on port properties. The local transportation system supports these plans by ensuring access, particularly freight access to these facilities. Clark County has 3 port districts: Port of Vancouver, Port of Camas, Washougal, and the Port of Richfield. Only the Port of Vancouver provides commercial waterborne shipping facilities. And airports are also an important economic benefit to Clark County. The influence on local and regional economic activity extends well beyond the airport site. Location of airports influence the geographic distribution of industries and can be a significant factor in the decisions of certain industries to locate in a specific state or region. There are 3 publicly owned and 17 privately owned airfields in Clark County. We can make that 4 publicly owned airfields when we include the Portland International Airport adjacent to Clark County. Publicly owned fields are Pearson Airfield, which is in Camas, which is in Vancouver, Grove Field, which is in the city of Camas, and then Woodland. There are 9 privately owned airports, and 3 of them are available for public use. The Cedars North Airport, Gohan, Fly for Fun. So just here's some extra background information about airports. So the Federal Aviation deals primarily with issues of safety and air traffic control. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, utilizes the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems to determine the role and eligibility of funding for airports within the U.S. Of Washington's 136 airports, the FAA only has designated 64 for inclusion in the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, less than half of the state systems of airports. In Clark County, Pearson Airfield and Grove Airfield are federally regulated airports. FAA's design standards represent standards and recommendations for airport design are mandatory for obligated airports and represent best practices for unobligated airports relative to airport design based on extensive research. And then, as we're all aware, Clark County has many interstate freeways to help facilitate regional travel. In Clark County, these highway facilities are I-5, I-205, SR-14, SR-500, SR-501, SR-502, and SR-503. At the same time, provides regional travel for everybody, but it also creates barriers to get across. Clark County has goals and policies related to freight, rail, and aviation. We have one policy to support the goal of and to encourage infrastructure development and services necessary to serve new industrial development. We have 3 policies to support the goal to ensure mobility throughout the transportation system. And I'll leave the slide up for a second so you can take a look at them.
I also want to interrupt. Will the interpreters tell me when I need to be switched off from one interpreter to the other?
Yes, sir. If you could please switch to Elizabeth Platt, I would appreciate it. Thank you. Great, we're good to go. Thanks for the pause.
Welcome. All right, so our sounding board questions. This is for the remaining part of the presentation. So we'll go over these for now. Do existing policies support growth of our ports, airports, and freight? Do existing transportation goals and policies include developing complete networks to include multiple modes of transportation for our ports, airports, and freight routes? And lastly, what can Clark County do to better accommodate freight movement in the transportation system? Before we head on, yes?
I have a comment with respect to I'm obviously representing the Railroad Advisory Board for Clark County, the 33-mile railroad, Chilachee Prairie Railroad. There are several times, many times, that the railroad crosses the streets in Clark County, some of which are adequately monitored with arms and lights and bells, but some aren't. And there are places where the roads could be redeveloped in different paths to avoid crossing the railroad, and in particular in the Rye Yard, where 43rd and 40th cross the railroad yard there and go a short distance to get onto St. John's. Those, as I understand, there was a plan to get rid of those crossings and route the traffic outside that area, which would alleviate some of the danger there in that yard, because two things. One is it creates inefficiencies in the yard, not being able to park vehicles in that yard on the 3 or 4 tracks that are there, number one. And number two, the sight line to get around those cars is very short to get on to St. John's. So it's dangerous and grossly inefficient. And that plan apparently has been on the board for a while, but has not been alleviated. And further to that, the railroad will likely be developing property, let's say north of the Winco on 117th and 119th, whatever that is. Properties in there where the railroad is crossing, I think very near a school and so on. Those are areas that are going to be needing special attention for that railroad to continue to travel up into Battleground. There possibly will be additional properties on the east side of 503 that will house industrial property, light industrial property, and will create additional train traffic in that area, which the crossings will need to be further enhanced. And I'm just saying that as a point of issue, and I'm sure that the Transportation Department and Public Works is aware of those issues. I just want to make sure that they stay on the forefront of everybody's imagination, because there's creating a lot of angst amongst the residents of those areas.
Perfect, Daniel, thank you. So as you're looking at the information that we'll discuss, keep that in mind and then compare that to what we have in front of us. I mean, do existing transportation goals and policies include developing complete networks to include multimodal modes of transportation for our ports, airports, and freight routes? And then what can Clark County do to better accommodate freight movement in the transportation system? So those are all things that we could think about and let us know how we can help based on what you know and see.
And Gary, just if I may, Mr. Weaver is correct. I just want to clarify. He mentioned Rye Yard. many of the sounding board members might not know where that's at. That's if you're heading on St. John's Road to the east of St. John's, there is the Shalachie Prairie rail line, and then there's industrial property further to the east of that rail line. That section between Minnehaha and 78th Street is where Mr. Weaver is talking about the rye yard.
This is Amy. I think I emailed Matt and Gary, just my brother, he worked for the railroad just recently, actually, for a few years. And I asked him what he thought. And I emailed you his response because it was too long for me to read, switch between, I'm on my phone doing this meeting. So if you want to take a look at that, that's his, it's not very long, but I emailed it to you guys. I may have emailed it to everybody, I don't know, but I just did it now.
I would appreciate an email of that, please. This is Daniel.
We can send Amy's email to the rest of the group.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Can you hear my voice?
Yes.
This is David. Just to add on to what he said, I kind of agree with that. Since I grew up here, I used to live on 119th Street as a kid, and we would play on the railroad tracks because there was not really any barrier to prevent me from just climbing over the fence and going right on the, and I don't know if that's changed since then. And I went to school at Prairie High, so I know kind of that area. Then the area of St. John's and then going into 78th Street, that's kind of where a lot of bus stops are. And so a lot of people get off the bus, they would either walk north or they would walk east. There's several churches that are to the east on 78th Street. And when you get to that point, there's all these railway lines going different directions, and though there is a light for me to push to cross, I always kind of feel awkward as a pedestrian going across because there's so many lines going so many ways. I'm very careful looking at every direction, and so I can imagine that that would be something that should be considered, because I don't know if anyone's ever been killed there. There have been car accidents, but I could see potential for it because of how many things are intersecting at the same time.
That is a difficult area because there's a junction there where they pull up to the north and then they back into the gas yard there and unload gas, and so there's a significant amount of time wasted there because they have to stand on the track right in the middle of 78th and then back into the other area. They replaced that light a few years ago, but I don't think it's still effective for what's needed in that area.
Well, this is good feedback. Thank you. So this is what we'll cover coming up, but I feel like we need to go back and finish answering our questions before we move on to our new topic.
You mentioned something about flight safety for the airports and how only some of our airports are under that federal system of aviation. Is there any reason the others needed to be, or are they fine how they are? I know that the system is like best practices and standards, but has there been any complaints about those airfields and if flights taking off not being safe with air traffic?
I don't know the answer to that, David. I don't know why airports chose to be under the FAA and why they chose not to. And I don't know of any complaints. And that doesn't mean they're not happening. I'm not looking at them, looking for them.
So do you think that we should contact those airports and ask them the reasons why and ask them if they're fine how it is or if they need assistance? Because if we're planning this stuff but we don't have the answers, that's why I was asking, should we ask them?
Well, so I mean, that's a great question to ask. So Washington State has an air traffic plan. It's called a WASP, and we'll get into that later on. And so they have some information in that about the airports, and we'll cover that later on. But it doesn't. The WASP, the state's aviation plan did not specifically address that.
And if I may interject a little bit, Gary, with regards to airports, there's the port of like Camas and the Port of Vancouver. I'm not sure if they own the field that's down by Highway 814, but what happens is that they also have an airport layout plan, and FAA regulates that airport from the perspective of funding the airport to a certain level. And the certain level is based on the number of the types of planes that come into that airport. And once they get to that certain level, then FAA does the regulations associated with it. And the airport layout plan deals with development around that airport that supports the airport itself. And so along with that, the FAA and also concurs with whatever the port puts out as far as their airport layout plan. And that's where we would take that information and see if it's something that we can use for our transportation part of this, the transportation system plan. So that's kind of where we're going with it. At least that's where we're kind of headed with it, as well as other information as well.
And in our Clark County Comprehensive Growth Management Plan, we have policies around airports and land use. So they need to be compatible.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. I'm glad you mentioned that. So, but did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that pretty much answered the question. I just want to make sure that all the parties that need to be included, that we get them included now before it's too late. We don't want to make plans that, oops, we didn't ask them and that we just messed up.
No, that's good. Thank you. So it sounds like we're ready to move on from our discussion from last month. Is there any input on these two questions? Anyone want to offer
real quick,
move on?
The feedback from BPAC on the questions, generally for the first two, they felt the answer was basically no. And for the third one, yes, we should pursue a different level of service standard. And the concerns were based around, making sure we're actually getting accurate counts of pedestrian bicyclists. How do we count how many people are inside of a bus? How do we count how many people are inside of a car? And, potentially the method that you presented earlier today might work, but basically making sure we look at other options on how we're counting people and basing our standards on, bicycles and pedestrians instead of just, specifically moving a large number of people. We just want to make sure that everything gets included and counted appropriately.
Thank you, Michael. Linda, did you have anything to comment on?
I just wanted to comment on multimodal level of service standards, and we at RTC are keeping tabs on what Metro is doing because they're currently working on reconsidering how they measure level of service. And as Clark County, previously they've relied a lot on vehicular volume to capacity ratios. So they're currently going through a study and research project on how they should evolve into looking at multimodal level of service. So we're keeping track on that, and perhaps we can report at a future meeting what Metro's experiences and what their conclusions are in their research project. I suppose, what timeline is Clark County considering perhaps evolving to use multimodal level of service standards? When would you be making a decision?
Well, so our transportation system plan, that's what we're looking at right now, is the topic. And You know, and at this point, what we could do is make recommendations to the county council of if that's what everyone agreed on, is we should move towards a multimodal level of service. And here are some policies that are recommended. It's up to them to adopt them. So it could happen next year, where we could move towards that direction. When we're scheduled to complete this project, I think the spring of next year, summer of next year.
And another comment I had, some of the data collection you mentioned, for example, how do we know how many people are on a bus and how many people do we know are in cars? Again, we have what is called a congestion management plan, which we are required to put together because of federal regulations. So RTC works with CTRAN on bus ridership at different segments of bus routes, again, for the congestion management program, and also works with a consultant to observe car occupancy on different corridors. But again, I think we learned at the previous meeting that more sophisticated traffic signal systems could perhaps help us with that data collection piece as far as auto occupancy is concerned.
Yeah, it gets complicated on trying to figure out how to count stuff. Who's going to count it? Who's going to spend the money to count?
Yeah.
Where's the data going to get kept?
Mm-hmm.
It's very ambitious, but I think well worth it. Just my personal opinion, and I'll stop with that.
As far as the recommendation to do a multimodal count system, I think BPAC would be in support of that recommendation to change the way we're doing the level of service standard to a multimodal thing, similar to what Linda was talking about.
Mr. Housley.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement that Mr. Andriotti and Linda just stated. Looking towards a multimodal system makes sense.
Well, good, thank you. All right, I think we're ready to move on. Does anyone else? The last call for this question, slides. Okay. The Washington State Freight and Goods Transportation System classifies highways, county roads, and city streets according to the average annual gross truck tonnage they carry. Truck tonnage values are derived from actual or estimated truck traffic count data that is converted into average weights by truck type. Their system uses 5 truck classifications, T1 through T5. The T1, more than 10 million tons per year. T2, 4 to 10 million tons per year. T3, 300,000 to 4 million tons per year. And T4, 100,000 to 300,000 tons per year. T5, at least 20,000 tons in 60 days and less than 100,000 tons per year. Corridors with the highest annual gross tonnage, T1 and T2 routes, are also identified as strategic freight corridors. The freight corridor classifications may change several times on the same road, depending on the land uses that attract freight movements. Clark County manages and maintains several T1 corridors, including Northeast 78th Street, sections of Patton Parkway, Highway 99, Northeast 99th Street, and St. John's Road. The T2 corridors include Minnehaha Street, Northeast 72nd Avenue, and sections of Highway 99. In addition to the freight corridor classifications, Clark County has a classification for commercial industrial roadways. These roadways are similar in look to urban local roads, but have a deeper subbase to handle the heavy truck weights. So that means there's a lot more gravel underneath the asphalt to handle that much weight. So the asphalt doesn't crack as the big trucks drive over it. Many industrial land uses have corresponding commercial industrial roadways, including Northeast 47th Avenue and roads that are adjacent to Northeast 72nd Avenue. Industrial land occurs on comprehensive plan designations of light industrial and heavy industrial. Areas with light industrial designations are implemented with light industrial, business park, and industrial railroad base zones and are intended to provide the community with employment opportunities such as compatible office and attractive new non-polluting industries. Areas designated industrial also provide for more intensive job-related land uses that pay family wages, such as professional offices, research, and technology industries. Heavy industrial designation is implemented with a heavy industrial base zone and provides land for heavy manufacturing, warehousing, and industrial uses that may be incompatible with other categories of land uses. This designation is appropriate for areas which have extensive rail and shipping facilities. So the rural industrial designation provides industrial uses in the rural area that are primarily dependent on the natural resources derived from the rural area. The heavy industrial base zone implements this designation. So the rural industrial land bank, we have that on the map, was removed in 2019 to comply with the Gross Management Hearings Board, bringing the comprehensive plan into compliance. And then lastly, in September of 2018, the council placed the freight rail dependent uses overlay on hold.
Sorry to interrupt you. We're going to switch the interpreters now.
Okay. Take a drink of water.
Thank you. Okay, we're good. Thank you.
Welcome. So many uses are allowed on industrial lands. And to get a flavor of allowed uses, they include but are not limited to agriculture, production, and processing, utilities, construction, manufacturing, wholesale trade, some retail uses, transportation and warehousing, and publishing and information. I-5 is the major spine running north and south connecting the region. It carries the highest number of vehicles and provides one of two routes over the Columbia River. This route is critical as it is the main route for freight and commuters who rely on the corridor to fulfill daily business needs. Freight mobility planners often refer to the last mile of the trip, meaning the transportation system directly adjacent to a freight hub. Performance of the transportation system during this last mile is a significant contributor to local ports' competitiveness because it affects every trip in and out of the port. Close coordination between ports and neighboring local governments on transportation planning can both make the port more competitive and support better transportation throughout the community. First mile or last mile connector routes that connect freight intensive land uses to high volume and alternate routes. These routes provide important freight linkages to strategic national defense facilities, significant intermodal facilities, warehouse districts, industrial land and distribution centers, and agricultural processing centers. Some are owned by WSDOT, Washington State Department of Transportation, and other public partners with the responsibility of maintaining and improving these routes so that they are suitable for freight transportation. In addition to the first last mile connections, alternative routes exist to facilitate movement throughout the region. State Route 14 serves as an alternative to Interstate 84, and Northeast Highway 9 serves an alternative to I-5. Clark County owns and maintains 78 bridges, including 3 pedestrian bridges. The county also inspects 27 other bridges owned by cities and 6 owned by railroads. On some bridges, Clark County has load or height restrictions that prevent certain size or type of trucks from using the bridges. The Washington Administrative Code requires the county to produce a written report on its bridge inspection program. Load restrictions slow the deterioration of bridges, protect the public's investment in transportation infrastructure, and provide safe travel across bridges. Load restrictions consider a truck's weight in tons and how that weight is distributed over its axles. In addition, restrictions can also be placed for the height of trucks. So in this map, Clark County has identified 18 load restricted bridges. None of them occur on the first or last mile truck routes. Mr. Weaver, I hope I can do this slide justice. If there's something I forget, you're gonna have to let me know. So Clark County's local, regional, and state economy is highly dependent on the efficient transport of goods to and from markets. Without investments to maintain and improve freight mobility in key highways and rail corridors and intermodal freight connections, the region's economy and its jobs and sustainability is at risk. Clark County owns 2 main rail lines that are both owned by Burlington Northern Santa Fe, BNSF, carrying both freight and passengers. The BNSF Railway operates more than 1,400 miles in Washington, which represents 44% of the state system. Schlachey Railroad is a 33-mile short line owned by Clark County and operated by the Portland-Vancouver Junction Railroad Company, a private operator. The short line railroads provide important collector-distributor services for the larger railroads and local rail services for shippers. Clark County has 3 port districts: the Port of Vancouver, Port of Kamas-Washougal, and the Port of Ridgefield. Only the Port of Vancouver provides commercial waterborne shipping facilities. And the Port of Kamas-Washougal provides facilities and services for land, air, water-based commerce to enhance employment and recreational opportunities, contributing to the quality of life in the community. They have a 430-acre industrial park located on the south side of SR 14 near 27th Street, which was created in 1966 when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers created a 5.5-mile levee along the Columbia River for flood protection. It is home to an average of 48 businesses with approximately 1,000 employees and an annual payroll exceeding $30 million. The Steigerwold Commerce Center, 120-plus acres east of the industrial park, is the site of future development. The marina has moorage to accommodate 350-plus boats and a 4-lane launch ramp. The Port District also operates Grove Field Airport. The Port of Ridgefield is located about 15 miles north of the city of Vancouver. The port's taxing district extends over 57 square miles, and the district is bisected by the I-5 corridor. The port adopted the Port of Ridgefield Comprehensive Plan in 2008. Port-owned assets include a 41-acre site on Lake River, 3 miles from I-5, and they're currently building a bridge over the BNSF rail lines, which will enhance access to the site and 3 parcels of land in the 78-acre Ridgefield Industrial Park located at the southwest quadrant of I-5 and Pioneer Street. The port-developed Ridgefield Industrial Park is home to over 20 businesses, providing some 800 jobs. Port of Vancouver is situated at the terminus of the Columbia River's deepest channel and forms a natural gateway to the river barge ports of eastern Oregon, Washington, and northern Idaho. The port operates international cargo docks, The third largest port in the state of Washington. Has 5 marine terminals, provides 13 deep draft vessel berths, and has 240 metric ton mobile harbor cranes to enable heavy lift cargo. The port is located within 2 miles of I-5 and is served by the Burlington Northern, Santa Fe, and Union Pacific Railroads, the Canadian National and the Canadian Pacific Railroads. The port has 800 acres of developed industrial and marine property with over 50 industrial tenants. Over 2,300 people are directly employed by the businesses, and nearly 17,000 jobs are connected to port activities. The port has over 500 additional acres of land for future development. Work began in 2004 on the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, process for the additional lands development as part of the port's Economic Development and Conservation Plan. Port's future development includes the Columbia Gateway area. Port focused attention on rail access improvement with a simulation and access study. The port is phasing the implementation of the West Vancouver Freight Access Project. Airports and air transportation services are provided in the context of a complex set of federal, state, and local government regulations, and each level of government has a certain degree of control over parts of the air transportation system. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, deals primarily with issues of safety and air traffic control. Washington State Department of Transportation's Aeronautics Division currently focuses primarily on general aviation airports and has some direct involvement with major passenger airports. Local jurisdictions influence land use and are usually the operating authorities. Washington State Department of Transportation's 2017 Washington Aviation System Plan, I mentioned that earlier, it's called the WASP. It conducted a capacity analysis to measure how well the existing facilities and components associated with Washington airports accommodate aviation activity in the state. Existing airport capacity in Washington was first measured against current 2014 levels of aviation demand. And the existing airport capacity in Washington was measured against forecast levels of aviation demand, identifying potential capacity constraints or shortfalls across the state through 2034. And the WASP, the Washington Aviation System Plan, identifies 3 key findings. So number 1 is the airfield capacity. Overall aircraft operations demand in Washington is forecast to increase from 13.6% of statewide capacity in 2014 to 17.1% in 2034. And the following airfields are expected to approach or exceed 100% capacity by 2034. Pearson, Woodland, Cedars North Park, and Fly for Fun. And aircraft storage and parking. Overall, storage demand in Washington is forecast to increase statewide by nearly 25% in 2034. The airfields that are expected to reach a storage capacity shortfall are Woodland, Cedars North Park, and Fly for Fun. And air cargo, most of the growth in air cargo within the state is driven by the increase in international wide-body aircraft service at SeaTac. Clark County does not have an air cargo airfields. And back to the questions. Now it's time for the fun stuff to answer the questions. Are we ready to start with number 1? Do our existing policies support growth of our ports, airports, and freight?
Gary, perhaps it'd be good to go back to the slide that actually had the policies so that we could look at the policies as they now are presented.
So as we go through the transportation system plan, we're looking at ways to improve the transportation system, but we're also looking at ways to improve our goals and policies. So as we ask these questions, think about them objectively as far as are our means meeting the need that we state in the policies, or if the policies need to be rewritten, or if we need to do a better job at implementing those.
I would say, this is Michael, as far as policy 971 there goes, I don't feel like we're currently meeting that. It seems like, you know, we're behind the need in a lot of areas. You know, if you listen to what people say when you're going to public hearings and those sorts of things. And I know a lot of that comes down to funding and being able to build the things.
From the railroad standpoint, I think that and we're probably on the bottom end of the totem pole in terms of priorities, but there are areas like the crossings at 43rd and 40th into St. John's. They get pushed aside. They were on the agenda to be fixed at one point in time, and then somebody decided that it was a lower priority and it got moved down to the bottom. But that not only creates a inefficiency in that Rye yard, but it also creates a danger in the people trying to cross or get onto St. John's at that point, because there's such obstructed view of that intersection because of the rail cars sitting there in between the two streets. So from a railroad standpoint, I think the priority has been very low.
So for the policy 9.7.1, you feel like it's low?
Hey Gary, Matt, this is Jamie. I got to be a little bit careful here since the PVJR is a client of mine. But I would agree with Dan that and I think it's a function of the railroad is just sort of being resuscitated as an important future option for industrial growth in the county. And so maybe it's more about focusing some policies to recognize some changes in state law that have will maybe enable more economic development to occur along the railroad. And that's a difference from the past comprehensive plans.
Well, you know, without getting into too much detail, you know, with the land bank and the freight rail uses that we're talking about, are you thinking of some other direction then, or just being able to pick up on that path of, because at one point in time we had land set aside for railroad, you know, up along up in that area along the Rye Junction, and then it got taken out. We've changed that land use, and now we have just the railroad overlay without a real zone.
Well, that particular the rural industrial land bank had less teeth than the Senate Bill 5517 in developing land along the railroad track. It gave much more opportunity for the railroad to develop in that area that was previously zoned as industrial land bank. So it is a further, once some of the disputes between the railroad operator and the county are resolved, that will be a significant area of development. In addition to that, across on the other side of SR 500 will be an additional larger area of development along that area. But in particular, I mean, those are in addition to the Rye Yard that's already there and existing and has numerous industrial clients that are using that Rye Yard for loading and unloading of goods. And that those two roads crossing there are a real hindrance to that process. But in further development will be happening up the line. It's a matter of timing.
Yeah, I agree with Dan. It's maybe like the whole short line is going to get amplified in terms of importance because of the 5517. But what concerns me a little bit is that policy also 554, talking about the grade separated where possible. You know, the grade separated roadways and rail lines are very expensive, as we discovered, you know, partly with the waterfront. And I don't, and like also I think having some experience with it out in Hillsborough along the rail line out there, it's not always financially feasible to do that. But I think we need to think a little bit smartly around that policy. Talking about like maybe financial feasibility, but also recognize that there's going to be more development along that rail line, and you're going to have more conflicts because of that.
Well, and it's a big safety concern. You know, when as I for the so I did an Artura Atlas amendment. We looked at north alignment over Northeast 99th Street, which crossed the railroad, and the state required us to have not a grade separated crossing for that, for safety, because they wouldn't approve anything other than that.
We're going to go ahead and switch, Matt. Thank you.
Well, in addition to that, there is some significant desire for activity above Brush Prairie or above Battleground. So there will be in future additional trains that do not go beyond Battleground now, that may go beyond Battleground and will create more traffic, not significantly more, but more traffic on highway, across highways up in that area, as well as there in Brush Prairie Battleground area. I meet continually with the folks from Brush Prairie, and their concerns are there are crossings there that are not regulated, and if in case a train gets stopped on the highway, across the highway, there is no egress from that area up around the golf course, because that blocks the only exit from that area.
You know, when talking about the you know, the feasibility, the cost of building a grade separated crossing, so where the next part of our analysis will look into one of the components is looking at the capital facilities plan. I'm just going to scroll back up. Yeah. Matt. Can you help me with what I was thinking?
I don't know what you were thinking.
Well, so chapter 7 of our plan, we'll look at. So what we'd like to do is eventually, if we get to the point where we say, yeah, let's do a multimodal level of service, what's it going to look like, and how's it going to cost, and how are we going to get there? And then same with this policy. I mean, we can look at all this stuff realistically. Okay, so what do these policies mean, and how is it going to help us or help us grow, or is it going to hinder us in growth? So I think eventually we're going to look at these questions, but just not right now. And I think you're on the right path, Mr. Halsey, by bringing that up.
I want to make one additional comment, and then I'll shut up about it. The fact is, the railroad's been there for over 100 years, and it's been it was very busy for a period of time when it was first built, and then it gradually went down and down and down and became very sleepy, certainly above the brush prairie area. And it's now used for recreational purpose with the BYCX folks working an excursion train up there. But it will become more active now. But real estate people keep telling everybody that buys homes up there that it's a sleepy railroad and it's never going to do anything. It's going to be torn up and be a trail and blah, blah, blah. And I guarantee you that's not going to happen. And it may increase substantially, or it may increase at least a little bit, but it's gradually going to increase in activity going forward. So I'm saying it should have a priority in that respect. And I'll shut up.
So that's well said. The things that I've heard and that I've written down from Michael said we're not meeting policy 9.7.1. The crossings at 40th and 43rd need to be fixed and prioritized in the capital plans. We may need to look at rewriting the policy 5.5.4 to become to align with the state law. We need to resolve the county and operator issues. The rye yard needs to be the top priority. And grade separation is great, but sometimes it's not financially feasible, and perhaps a cost benefit ratio should be examined in that policy. Also, crossings near Brush Prairie and Battleground are not regulated specifically by the Cedars Golf Course, and that can stall traffic and keep people isolated, which is not good. And the railroad, while it's old, it will become more active, and we need to promote that.
So this is Jay Chester. One other comment, I guess, throughout this is that in Cedars Golf Course is a great example. That's where everything seems to be meeting each other. Residential development, the Chalachi Trail Railroad, comes very close to there. The county was looking at putting a trail in there, and a trailhead right there across the street from Cedars Golf Course. And it seems like, to me, that when we say prioritize the infrastructure development and advance in these areas that are suitable for industrial development, we need to maintain that. Areas of industrial development, we need to make sure those are designated and that we don't let development encroach on those things and cause the potential environment to change, I guess is what I'm saying, the infrastructure environment to change. Because, right now, honestly, the golf course is up for sale. County's looking at parts of it to protect, to provide, the county parks is looking at it to provide the lands around Salmon Creek and everything to provide a trail and that kind of stuff. But if we don't buy it, then, you know, quite honestly, a developer will. And so that could easily change. The other aspect I think we have to look at and is the use of rail, use of air, and use of, quite honestly, of freight is changing with Amazon doing so many individual package deliveries. I mean, I get packages, don't get me wrong, my wife's a huge Amazon fan. You know, we get packages till 10 o'clock at night. So to prioritize freight, we almost have to redefine freight because the delivery systems are changing.
It's a good point.
Therefore, they impact freight, rail, and aviation. And believe me, if we could solve that little problem or puzzle in Clark County, you know, we'd be used as the benchmark. So anyway, that's just my kind of comment or look at this.
You know, that is excellent. I want to go back a slide, or actually forward a slide or two.
So Gary, real quick on that slide you were just on,
Which one?
with the T that identified the freight.
Please.
So this is kind of related to the same idea. If we look at this, there's a lot of T3 corridors on there. You know, that's a lot of freight moving through many different parts of the county. And one way we could potentially look at improving multimodal is to say, well, we've got all this freight spread out right now. Is there a way we can bring some of this freight back together and maybe focus freight more here, but not worry as much about, say, pedestrian and bicycle on this specific corridor? Let's focus pedestrian and bicycle on this neighboring corridor that isn't quite as good for freight, where maybe we could reduce lane widths and increase sidewalk widths and increase bike lane widths to make it more friendly and more safe for those modes. So you're still obtaining all of the goals, you know, while utilizing the existing infrastructure. I know it would be a massive undertaking to study something like that.
No, here, look, watch. So what you're talking about, we're looking at these first last mile connectors, so these green areas. So the Washington State's freight plan, they would like to see the first last mile connectors turn into complete streets. So it's not just for a truck.
Interesting.
Bike lanes, sidewalks. These are going into areas of, you know, of commerce. So looking at this stuff, where our policy is going to get us here. Like these are in unincorporated areas of Clark County, and it's just a big puzzle for us. It's like, well, we see all this stuff, and it would be nice to maybe the next one I can look at the T3s and these first last miles to see if they're one and the same. I can't tell from the map. I don't think they are.
There's a few of them. The specific thought I had in my head was 99th Street and 78th Street. You know, they're pretty similar locations. They're both T3s. You know, is there a way to make one a more freight corridor and one a more pedestrian bike corridor? Because they're so close to each other. You know, it seems if you could focus more on one aspect on one of them and the other on the other, maybe that's a good way to use the existing system to kind of get multimodal faster.
This is Dave Poland. I'd like to speak about that. I live in that area he's talking about, and I would disagree. My uncle, he's passed away, so he can't talk about it, but he used to work for Gordon's Trucking, and then he taught for Gordon's Trucking, even back when we had triple rigs, before that was banned. And so sometimes trucks just need to make a diversion route. Same thing as like a C-Tran bus. Sometimes something happens. They need to make a diversion route. Unlike a train, they're able to do that. And so you might see a lot of them choosing a different way to get on I-5 than another one. There's reasons for that. I would hate to try to say, nope, you're no longer allowed to use this road. At the same time, I'm going to walk wherever I want to walk, whether sidewalks or not. And there should be more sidewalks. I would not want to say this is only for people that use bicycles and this is only for pedestrians that use a sidewalk, or say you're no longer allowed to use it for a sidewalk or bicycles. With my idea perception of multimodal, you're not going to ban cars from parking next to their house either. That they're doing that in downtown Vancouver, and it's causing some problems from elderly people, elderly women that are told they have to park in the parking lot. It's dimly lighted and they're supposed to walk home, and they can't do this. We have to think of the human aspect, and that's what's so complicated. You can't have a simple fix, say, well, let's just ban this, let's do this. If we want to make this, if we want to make Clark County a place where people can live, and they can live from birth until their senior citizen pass away, and have business as well, and have a car, and have a bicycle, all that, whatever we want them to do. We can't say, well, we're going to adjust things so this is banned and that's banned. We would have to have a large discussion with the residents and the truckers before we could do anything like that. In that particular 78th and 99th Street, I wouldn't touch that. I wouldn't make one of it for one, not the other.
And I agree with you, David, there. I wasn't thinking we would ban anything anywhere. I was just thinking if there was a way we could consolidate, you know, the majority of it, not take away alternate routes, but just say, let's try to get the majority of something here. You know, maybe we can help things flow better overall throughout the county. I'm definitely against denying things. I don't want to take things away from people.
I appreciate your clarification on that. So my personal opinion would be, talk to somebody like, you know, the people that work for Gordon's Trucking or some other trucking company and say, you guys, I see you guys are taking all these alternate routes. Can we have a discussion of why this is happening? That's what I would suggest.
Yeah, I would agree. That'd be a great start.
I think that would be part of the conversation, but you got to remember, you know, there's a different type of truck that would go to a residential community versus going to an industrial area. So that's, you know, again, we got to identify the area that's going to it, because again, the transportation or the freight systems are changing, and so that's, and the material they're carrying is changing. Quite honestly, I mean, I don't want to, you know, I don't think we have time or can delve into that level of detail, but you know, trains are carrying, you know, trains get a bad rap because they were associated with carrying oil. Quite honestly. And the ports, you know, got you know, a black eye because some of them were willing to, you know, have the trains drop the oil off at the ports. That's not, you know, I mean, that's a piece of what trains carry, but not the bulk of it. I don't think David would know, but you know, I think that's part of it. Is we got to see what's being carried by the what freight, quote unquote, is being carried and to where. So again, remember this, the main part of this was industrial areas, taking the bulk freight to industrial warehouses, I assume, and industrial, you know, manufacturing areas and stuff like that. So, which should be located on major streets, which should allow you to have bigger trucks, you know, on and on and on. So anyway.
Yeah, I know what you mean is like if they're a logging truck versus people that are going to Winco or Fred Meyer's with their trucks to deload, because regular trucks, they're going to go back and forth in 78, 99 because there's all these different grocery stores and stuff.
Okay, thank you. That was a lot to write down, but I think I got it as far as we need to differentiate our truck routes based on what trucks, whether they're long haul trucks versus service trucks. And we can start to prioritize those routes based on time and what trucks use those different routes.
One of the other things that I thought might be considered is if you have truck routes going to and from that you could use alternatives to go in one direction and then another alternative to go the other direction. You would provide space on both of those streets for additional bike paths or other pedestrian facilities, that they could both share the same street, but they're just going in different directions. And I don't know how feasible that is, but in some places it could be very feasible that they're going in opposite directions.
Can you give us a street example you're thinking of?
Well, I'm just thinking if somebody's going out, 78th and coming back, they could come back 99th or vice versa. If that's the streets we were talking about, or if you're driving in from one place location, then you just go north or south or east or west a little bit to take another route to go back the other direction, so that the truck traffic is prohibited maybe in one direction or restricted in one direction, as opposed to the other street which restricted in the other direction. It's a possibility. I'm not saying it's feasible in all situations, but it's something to consider.
Let me go back. So maybe like a repurposing policy of our roads. I mean,
well, we've put, and I said this in the last meeting, is that we've put bike lanes on streets that are narrow and windy and are dangerous, frankly. We put bike paths and pedestrians in there, and you go around a corner, and if a bike path is close to the edge and you're around the corner, it's disastrous. But if you had a large street that you could restrict traffic on one side, then you could make the bike paths on the other side and utilize that more, instead of having it available for trucks.
It's like we might need a different policy to ensure mobility throughout the transportation system.
It's not something obviously that can be used everywhere. It's something that's considered on major pathways that have a particular street that goes in or out of that area.
No, I just along the lines of looking at bike lanes. Not everyone is comfortable in a bike lane, and maybe we need greenways.
And Gary, to that thought, maybe that's a policy edit that we need, is the flexibility of developers and the county to more easily, like say, take the bike lanes off the road, because you got 12 feet of bike lane on the road. Well, you can take that 12 feet and move it to one side or the other off the roadway, but it's difficult. There's not a lot of flexibility right now to be able to do that. Whereas if the policies could allow that flexibility, we could take those bike lanes and put those facilities in a shared pathway that's even 18 foot wide and still be within the same footprint of the existing right-of-way. And then we open up the facility to numerable more people, and it increases safety.
Yeah, and that's and there's so many things that would keep us from doing stuff like that in our design standards, our Tura Atlas.
Right.
Do I need to switch the interpreters?
Sure, that would be a great time. Go ahead.
I mean, it doesn't mean that it couldn't happen. I mean, it's all a suggestion. We could suggest a new policy that provides some sort of flexibility.
Gary, do you want to move on to the second question?
Yes, please. To existing transportation goals and policies include developing complete networks to include multimodal, multiple modes of transportation for our ports, airports, and freight routes. You scroll back up to what we have on the books. Okay.
I think the comments that we've received kind of get to that point as far as developing a total system. There were a lot of good ideas that were shared, and I think some of the comments for the first question also get to the second question. Sounding board can feel free to add in, but I believe we kind of captured the answers for question number 2.
My biggest question on that one is the inclusion of airports, since our airports are so, I guess, small, if you will. It seems like not a lot of things that we focus on has anything to do with them. And in fact, I have only lived here for 15 years, but I was probably here for 7 or 8 before I even knew there was an airport downtown. And then the one in Woodland, I drove past for months before I even knew it was there. And I found out it was there because a plane scared the crap out of me landing on it when I was driving up the freeway.
Right.
So I feel like a lot of stuff doesn't focus at all on the air transport. But then the question is, how do we even do that in our current system, since it's more, for small use?
Right, and I've been at the county for a little over 15 years, and I've been through 2 comp plan updates, and we really haven't done a lot with airports, because they're very complicated animals.
Yeah.
It's more of a land use compatibility with the airport.
Yeah, I mean, Washington State Department of Aviation has the a whole separate manual related to land use compatibility that needs to get incorporated with comp plans, and I know the county's done that on this stuff. The one thing I would say is I've heard that the Grove Field at the port of Camas Washougal's got some interest in intensifying that use up there, and so it may be worthwhile for staff to reach out to them and get a comment specifically as related to that airfield.
I know that they are interested in expanding that airfield up there. And I could reach out to them and see if they have any input. Let's move on to the last question that we have. What can Clark County do to better accommodate freight movement in the transportation system?
I think this relates to what has been discussed before, in that we need to be looking at what is the future of freight transportation and how things are changing, because we've got increased number of, say, delivery trucks moving around our transportation system.
In my neighborhood, I come around. I live on a busy road, so I come around the corner and there's a UPS driver, 75 feet from the intersection. Is that the best place to stop? Do we need policies to keep them from doing stuff like that? The delivery is important, and I love my UPS drivers. I don't want them getting hurt.
In my mind, that'd be a tough one to put a policy on, because essentially they're going to get stuff dropped off, and you see plenty of delivery drivers now that disobey whatever other rules we've currently got in place. So
Yeah,
I think focusing more on just getting them through places quickly would be a more efficient use of policy than trying to worry about exactly where they're stopped necessarily, even though it is dangerous. I agree with you.
I think for the UPSs, the FedEx and Amazon delivery, time is money. And regardless of policies that we enact or characteristics that we implement in our streets, they're going to do whatever gets them the quickest drop-off point.
Right. So yeah, does it mean that we need to design our streets to accommodate a little bulb out every few hundred feet, so they can pull into these areas and get their drone out to deliver packages? I don't know.
I could see that being a potential option if we were able to say move all pedestrian and bicycle traffic to one side of the street and then put bulb outs on the other side of the street or something along those lines. Because ultimately it becomes a space issue, just like all the other elements. Do we have the space to put those things in?
Yep.
I wouldn't think it would be a good idea to have pedestrians and bicycles on one side of the street and not on the other side, because in the rural areas, there could be a house you need to go over there, there needs a store you go there, and you're going back and forth. A lot of times there isn't a crosswalk or a lighted crossing, so they're literally running across the street because there's a long path before you get a way to do that. My personal experience is it's better to have it paved on both sides so you have an option of going up and down whichever way, because you just never know what's going to happen in the future. You don't know what's going to be built in the rural area in the future. And if you've only paved this one side, because there's only one building over here, like I say, a safe over here, and then all of a sudden there's a Target and there's a Kohl's and there's all this other stuff, yeah, then it's going to be a mess. That's my personal opinion.
I don't know if Gary dropped out or is video disconnected.
Yeah, it looks like he may have had a problem with something happened.
I didn't mean to kill him with my comments.
Yeah, there he is.
The county seems to think I've had too long of a work day and kicked me off the computer. I'm gonna have to disagree with them.
So Gary, I think we've gotten some good comments on all three questions. We can summarize those and email them out to the group after the meeting, and then also present those for the next meeting at the start of the next meeting.
Okay, that's good. So we don't have to stay here until 6.
I have a quick question, and I don't know if it's going to be covered in one of the other topics or not, and that is the congestion caused by school buses. And I know they're sacred to everything, and they should be, but at certain times of the day, the congestion is horrible with school buses.
We're at a early part of our discussions together, so we can bring that topic up at a future meeting.
Okay.
And let me just finish this presentation. As mentioned earlier on, oh boy, come on. Speeding. The speeding hotline right there. 360-397-2211, extension 5482. And then if there are any of these concerns that we've raised during this meeting, we'll click on the link and it'll take you straight to the request. You'll see, let's see, oh, there we go, report a road concern. You could fill out your name, the site. You could choose what it is you want to mention.
This is a great thing to use if you notice, bike lane or pedestrian striping that's, become worn away. I've used it for that before, so at least it gets it on there that the county then knows that there's a deficiency that needs to be repaired, because, it's hard to cover all the striping in the county, so it's a great thing to use.
Where's this located?
The worn bike lane?
No, I mean, where is it?
I know. I'm teasing you. I'm sorry.
You want the specific address?
Yeah, no. Oh my goodness. Look at me for being a smart aleck.
So he directed you to the Transportation System Plan webpage, and then there's a specific link that's called Sounding Board that has all of your materials on there. Under Sounding Board, there's the PowerPoint presentation for this meeting, and if you open up that PowerPoint presentation, you'll find the link to this. And Gary, can you go back to the TSP webpage so that the Sounding Board can see how that's navigated?
Yes.
I was looking for it on the other computer I have here, and I couldn't find it. I could get Transportation System Plan, but I couldn't find the Sounding Board agenda.
Can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. So then you see the Sounding Board. You'd select that, and then members and meeting information.
And if we haven't already, we'll make a link to this in our emails so that it directs you to this webpage.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, the most recent email that you guys sent me, that Gary sent me, it had that link.
Okay, great.
I think that's it for the presentation.
Thank you. You all provided us really good
Thank you, everybody.
We'll digest it, summarize it, put it back out to you so that you can comment back, and we can continue this discussion in September.
Very good.
Thank